September 11th, 2001, the day the world will never forget. If you don't remember where you were when you first saw or heard about the events of that date, then you probably weren't old enough to remember anything. It's not an exaggeration to say that the world changed that day. The joy of security felt by all Americans suddenly vanished, and for the first time, people here felt vulnerable. There's no shortage of videos questioning the official story of 9/11 online. And rightfully so. The fairy tale conveyed to us by the 9/11 Commission is a complete insult to our collective intelligence. Many of these videos contain a wealth of evidence, and to anyone with any self-dignity, proof that we were lied to about what happened that day. Now this video is going to be quite different from those. I'm not going to be looking at physical evidence telling you that jet fuel can't melt steel beams. I won't be picking apart inconsistencies from the mainstream media, and I won't be theorizing on what may have actually occurred or who did it, although I may give you a pretty good idea of who's responsible. Instead, I'm going to focus on the numerology of not just the events of 9/11, but the actual date, September 11th, 2001, and why this exact date is truly like none other in the history of this nation. Most people who do acknowledge the existence of a secret cabal running the world behind the scenes know they practice numerology, but very few understand how important numerology truly is to them. It's well beyond a hobby, far more than just a tradition, and truly a fanatical religious practice. For instance, even those I know who believe 9/11 was an inside job, virtually nobody noticed this. Note the time on the screen of 9:02 a.m. Now pay close attention as the plane races in and hits the building. You see that? Boom! 9:03. The plane strikes the building at almost exactly 9:03 a.m. Now here's President Bush walking up to the podium at Emma E. Booker Elementary School. And see the time on the clock? 9:29 a.m. Watch what happens right before he starts speaking. It changes to 9:30. Notice that? Flight 93 was one of 4 planes to be hijacked on 9/11. The first airplane to crash that day, American Airlines Flight 11, crashed into the 93rd floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The airplane that hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center is said to be United Airlines Flight 175. 11 plus 175 equals 186. Divide this number by 2, and it's 93. The 186th prime number is 1109, like the date 11th of September. Also on that date, we're told an airplane hit the Pentagon. That was American Airlines Flight 77. From the time the plane took off at 8:20 a.m. to the time the airplane crashed at 9:37 a.m. is 77 minutes. The Pentagon, which sits on the 77th meridian, is 77 feet tall. The plane is said to have been flying at an impossible 530 miles per hour. While they give you several conversions here, it's missing the most important one. Because you see, 530 miles per hour is 777 feet per second. 7 plus 7 is 14, and the Pentagon's address is 1400 Defense. The 14th verse of Revelation in the King James Bible has a Jewish gematria value of 7,777. But why would they do this? Why would they set so many of the same numbers up to occur in the same event? Why make it so obvious? Well, before we can answer that, we have to look at the stories behind the people who play the most important roles in society. Now, there's a lot of images online purporting that Barbara Bush could be the daughter of Aleister Crowley, and some researchers will tell you that this is absolutely the case. It's something that certainly can't be proven not to be true. But when looking at these images and making your mind up, also consider this. Aleister Crowley created the religion Thelema in 1904 with the writing of the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law is centered around 2 primary statements, will and love. Now in the Greek languages, will translates to Thelema and love to agape. Using the Greek technique of isopsophy, which applies a numerical value to each letter, the letters of each of these words sum to 93. Here's a look at the Greek isopsophy chart. The word thelema sums to 93 by adding up the individual 6 letters that make up that word. And agape in Greek, 5 letters adding up to 93. The Book of the Law also had a name in Latin called Liber Veliges. Excuse my pronunciation. Now, if we reverse the alphabetic order and reduce each number to a single digit, the name of this in Latin sums to 93. The unicursal hexagram, the symbol of thelema, bears a striking resemblance to the magic square of Saturn, certainly not exact, but reminds one nonetheless. There also happens to be a hexagon on the pole of the planet Saturn. Saturn is of great significance to the occult, and it's commonly worshipped as the keeper of time. By assigning a value to each letter relative to its position in the alphabetic order, the word Saturn sums to 93. Crowley was a Satanist, and it's no secret Satanists like doing things backwards, like playing their records, for instance. So when it comes to gematria, it's only logical that we turn the alphabetical order backwards. The number 93, when spelled out in reverse ordinal, sums to 154. Practitioners of thelema are called thelemites. This equals 154 too. Throughout this presentation, we're going to be looking at gematria in the Bible, and for this, we're going to be looking at the King James Version. King James equals 154. I'll link to this document that discusses Freemasonry and its relationship to the King James Bible and Solomon's Temple as well. In single reduction gematria, Scottish Rite of Freemasonry equals 154. 154 is a number I talk about in my Murder by Numbers series. Ritual sacrifice has an ordinal value of 154. And in the book of Revelation, the book that we'll be decoding here, the 154th verse is 911. The King James Bible was completed in the year 1611, which has an upside down 119 in it. And King James Bible sums to 119, alphabetic order. The word revelation sums to 121. This is a number that's directly connected to the number 11. The square root of 121 is 11. And in something called Jewish gematria, which is based on the original Latin alphabetic order, the word revelation sums to 1010. In numerology, it's important to note that zeros are ignored. So this number represents, for a numerologist, the number 11. The ruler of end times during the book of Revelation is the synagogue of Satan. That sums to 1201, much like 121. King James in the alphabetic order equals 89, which is also the 11th Fibonacci number. In satanic gematria, which is a cipher connected with the number 666, in fact, satanic gematria equals 666 in this cipher, King James sums to 404. Thelema was founded in the year 1904. So let's take a look at Revelation 19:4 to see if we can gain a little understanding. This verse, using the alphabetic order in gematria, sums to 1,160. The 1,160th prime number is 9377, a number comprised of the two-digit numbers that I began the video speaking about. If you turn the number 1,160 upside down, it looks a lot like 911. This is a number that seems to connect thelema with Judaism, which in the alphabetic order is 77. Both of these religions use the hexagram as their symbol, the unicursal hexagram for thelema, and the Star of David on the flag of Israel. Using the square number cipher, where each number is multiplied by itself prior to adding it to the equation, the word Jewish equals 1,160. Before going any further, allow me to address the inevitable accusation that this presenter and or the video are anti-Semitic, because I can already see the comments, before they start to roll in. No one watching this video should misinterpret its content to imply that Judaism and its practitioners are inherently bad or evil. First off, only a small portion of Jews, many of them only claiming to be Jewish, are actually involved in carrying this kind of thing out and keeping it a secret. Second, power and control are the real objectives, and all the major religions are used as pawns in some fashion in order to obtain it. The holy books of Judaism and Christianity happen to be the ones that laid out the groundwork, and followers of Islam are now being blamed for the terror. It's not hard to find examples of Jewish people protesting political Zionism, the occupation of the West Bank, and other globalist strategies. So don't be an idiot and lump everyone into one giant conspiracy. The important part is to ask yourself, who benefits? And since 9/11, there's no question the military-industrial complex that supports both American and Israeli interests has. Much of the occulted knowledge does lie within the Jewish holy books, and the Book of the Law is a tribute to this. In the reverse order, the Book of the Law equals 239. And in Jewish gematria, Torah also sums to 239. Another look at the Latin name for the Book of the Law, this time in Francis Bacon gematria. This is one of two ciphers that accounts for capital letters. Here, each time a capital is used, 26 is added to the equation. And here, the name of the book sums to 254. This is a number you're going to see very often in this presentation. The 254th day of the year is 9/11, September 11th, but internationally this date is written 11/9. We'll explain how we get to 254 mathematically later. Thelema is founded on the ethical concept, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Now we're looking at Frank Baconist gematria. This is the other cipher that takes capital letters into account. This one is arranged differently, however, with the capital and small letters bunched together. And if we reverse this cipher, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, has a value of 1109. Here's a look at the chart for Hebrew gematria. The planet Saturn, called Shabtai in Hebrew, is of great significance. Their god El, who was the king of the gods, was literally Saturn. American calendars have Saturday, which is just one letter off from being Saturn Day. And in the Jewish culture, Saturday is Shabbat, derived from the word Shabtai, and this is a holy day, a day of rest. Shabtai in gematria sums to 713. Numbers are most directly related to their prime factors, and in this case, 713 factors down to 23 times 31. 23 and 31 are the 9th and 11th prime numbers. In English, Saturn equals 119 in Francis Bacon gematria. Using the alphabetic order, Saturn's nickname, All-Seeing Eye, sums to 119. The nickname for the flag of Israel, Star of David, equals 119. All-Seeing Eye in reverse sums to 205. In Jewish gematria, Israel equals 205. Some of the significance of 9/11 could trace back to the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence is a numerical chain in which the previous two numbers are added together to obtain the value of the next. On the chart on the bottom of the screen, you can see I have reduced the first 24 Fibonacci numbers to a single digit. When you do that, you get this repeating pattern of 24 numbers. So if I go from the 25th to the 48th Fibonacci numbers, you'll find that they will reduce to this same exact 24-digit pattern. This pattern ends with the number 9 and begins with two ones, like 11. Through gematria and mathematics, you can see how Saturn is related to our own moon, and why a total eclipse is given honor in the English language. Using English extended gematria, which is a cipher similar to Hebrew gematria and Greek isopsephy, total eclipse sums to 713. The words wisdom and creative also have this value. Mother-father equals 713. And in trigonal gematria, where the associated triangular numbers are used for each letter, the word knowledge equals 713. A symbol of sacred geometry, a vesica piscis is the shape formed by two circles of the same size overlapping at each other's center. As the moon begins to cover up the sun during a total eclipse, a vesica piscis lies in the intersection. This concept is represented through gematria in the English language. Vesica piscis and solar eclipse both share reduction and ordinal values of 53, 134, and 190. This shape is also what the Washington Monument sits atop in our nation's capital. Saturn appears to have a very special relationship to our own moon. In the time it takes for the moon to do one full circuit around the Earth in relation to the sun, which is called one synodic month, the Earth has to spin around 29.5 times, meaning there's 29.5 days in one synodic month. Meanwhile, in order for the planet to do one full circuit around the sun, the Earth must travel around the sun 29.5 times, meaning that one orbital period is 29.5 years. If you take the difference of these two numbers and divide it by the larger number, the result is a tiny fraction, 0.25%, or 1/398th. And this is kind of eerie. You see, the moon's distance from the Earth at its perigee is 369,000 kilometers, whereas the sun has a distance from the Earth of 147.1 million kilometers at its perihelion. That means that the sun is almost exactly 398 times further from the Earth than the moon. And of course, this means the moon, which has a diameter of about 3,474 kilometers, is about 1/400th the size of the sun. This fraction varies. Sometimes the moon looks larger than the sun, and sometimes it looks smaller, which is why we get both total and annular solar eclipses. Gematria is, of course, geometry within the language, and perhaps the reason the word geometry has a symmetrical gematria in English ordinal of 108 is because this number connects the Earth to the sun. The sun's diameter is roughly 108 times the Earth's, and its distance is roughly 100 times further than its diameter. This 147 million kilometers, by the way, this translates to about 93 million miles. Again, 93, the gematria of Saturn. In the alphabetic order, Saturn, the keeper of time, equals 254. In Francis Bacon, Saturn and the moon equals 254. Using extended gematria, the words time and light both sum to 254. Saturn in the reverse order equals 69. This is the ordinal value of both eclipse and circles, and of course an eclipse is the intersection of the two biggest circles in the sky. The 69th prime number is 347. This is a number that has to do with cycles and death. In Hebrew gematria, the word for sacrifice sums to 347. Death in reverse primes equals 347. The World Trade Organization was integral in getting the World Trade Center built. That's 347 in Francis Bacon. And in Jewish gematria, Arlington, where the Pentagon was hit near Washington, D.C., is also 347. The number 13, when spelled out, has Jewish gematria of 347. Everyone knows something's up with the number 13. I don't even think any buildings here in America have a 13th floor. There's some mad superstition going on around here, and maybe this is why. 13 is adored by the dark occult, and they tend to stamp it all over the biggest false flags. WTC equals 1003 in Jewish gematria, just like Sandy Hook in English Extended. Another big-time mass shooting was at a Charleston church, which is 130 with all reverse exceptions. And last month, we got the biggest shooting ever in Las Vegas, which is 130 reverse. 13 squared is 169. The largest mass shooting before Las Vegas was at the Pulse nightclub, 169. And what about when the Muslim couple supposedly shot up the Inland Regional Center? The word 13 sums to 99 in simple gematria, as does Mandalay Bay. And remember Columbine High School? That one scared the crap out of me as a kid, and it's got 99 in reduction. Earlier I talked a little bit about 713. This is another one that pops up in false flags, most notably the two congressmen who pretended to get shot. Stephen Joseph Scalise has 713 gematria, and measuring to the date of the Gabby Giffords event in Tucson, 713 extended, was a span of 77 months and 7 days. But get this. Of the various basic ciphering techniques used, reverse squares, which will be added to my site in the next update, usually yields the largest value of any. And when you write the number 13 and add it up, you get 2001, the year of the biggest false flag of all time, the 9/11 attacks. Let's jump back 13 years from September 11th, 2001. And of course, we get to the date September 11th in the year 1988. This span of 13 years is also 156 months. The 156th prime number is 911. Another significant number to the occult is 33. That's the highest degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. When you write that number out, it equals 156 ordinal. Now look at the magnitude of this solar eclipse from September 11th, 1988. You see that there? It's 0.9377. Do you remember this number from before? Well, remember, flights 93 and 77 both crashed on 9/11. And 9377, the 1160th prime number. The point of greatest eclipse occurred at 4:44 International Time. The 444th prime number is 3119, and this is a number closely connected to 9/11. Measuring from the World Trade Center bombing in 1993 on the date February 26th to 9/11/2001 is exactly 3,119 days. 13 is the sixth prime number, and Saturn is the sixth planet from the Sun. Sixth planet in Jewish gematria equals 733. This is the 130th prime number. Total eclipse, when dropping the Jewish cipher to an ordinal base, sums to 130. Sixth planet, also in Sumerian gematria, which is the alphabetic order times 6, equals 888. This is the average distance of Saturn from the Sun, 888.2 million miles. Multiply 888 by 2 and you get 1776, the year the United States declared its independence. Take note that this was an eclipse from Saros cycle 144. The surface gravity of Saturn is 10.44 meters per second square. Time in Jewish gematria, 144, for which Saturn is the keeper of. And we'll look at this more in relation to the Pentagon in a little bit. So 13 years before 9/11/2001, we had an annular solar eclipse, and 6 years to the day after 9/11, there was a partial solar eclipse. And look at the Saros number for this one, 154. Talked about this one before. September 11th, 2001, in single reduction, also sums to 154. World Trade Organization in Hebrew sums to 154. Of course, 9/11, the 154th verse of Revelation. And also, check out the magnitude on this eclipse, 7507, kind of like 757. Two of the planes that crashed on 9/11, supposedly, were 757s. This brings us to the annual day of fast on the Jewish calendar called Tisha B'Av. This day commemorates the destruction of the Second Temple, in addition to the First, or Solomon's Temple, which housed the Ark of the Covenant, 254 reverse ordinal. Recall September 11th is the 254th day of the year. So even on the surface, the similarities are striking. Tisha B'Av occurs on the 9th day of the 11th month of their calendar and honors two temples, while in America, on the 11th day of the 9th month, we remember those who perished in the Twin Towers. Some have argued that Av is not the 11th month, but if you begin counting months at the beginning of the year, like anyone normally would, then it's definitely the 11th. Furthermore, in Jewish gematria, Tisha B'Av sums to 911. And remarkably, the 9th day on the 11th month in the Gregorian calendar, November 9th, sums to 1109, just like the way the date is written. But we're not done. Also in Jewish gematria, this time using the ordinal method, both Solomon's Temple and World Trade Center equal 181. Also in Jewish ordinal, Saturn sums to 88. This is a number that represents the passage of time in many ways. Photographing the sun and the moon at the same time each day of their respective cycles, you'll see a figure 8 develop. The infinity symbol makes a similar shape. And in the English Kabbalah, circle equals 88 in both primary ciphers. The number 88 is made up of 4 circles. Each of these circles has 360 degrees, giving us 1,440 degrees in all. That's the number of minutes in 24 hours. The 88th prime number is 457. The second temple is also referred to as Herod's temple, as it was under Herod the Great's rule the temple was built. 8 times 8 is 64. Solar eclipse equals 64 reduced, and Solomon's temple is 640. The two towers looked like an 11, both 11 and 1, summed to 64 ordinal. Israel, in both Hebrew and English gematria, has an ordinal value of 64, as does World Trade Organization Hebrew reduction. As for why it's primarily called the Second Temple and not Herod's, of interest to me is that second and eclipse have the same Jewish gematria of 192. Finally, solar eclipse equals 127 Jewish ordinal, and it was buildings 1, 2, and 7 that fell that day. But of course, more goes into this than just Jewish tradition. The Coptic calendar begins their new year on September 11th, has since about the year 1900, and will till about 2100. In gematria, Coptic calendar equals 254 in the reverse order. September 11th, the date that leaves 111 days in the year. Coptic Orthodox Church, full reduction, 111. On this Coptic New Year, the Church commemorates martyrs with a holiday called Nowruz. In reverse reduction, this is 33, but of more interest, of course, English extended, Nowruz, summing to 2001. 33 years before 2001 was the year 1968. Solomon's Temple, in reverse reduction, equals 68. And in that year alone, construction on the North Tower began in August. The architect firm hired for the job was Emery Roth & Sons. That sums to 68 in reduction. Minoru Yamasaki, 62 reduction. He was the lead architect on the World Trade Center, which in Hebrew reduction sums to 62. Also in that year, George W. Bush graduates Yale University, and 911 became the emergency dialing code for America. Also in 68 saw the release of the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick has ordinal gematria of 171, and you'll see this number from time to time in this presentation, the 171st prime number, 1019. He died on the date March 7th, which is the 66th day of the year. That was exactly 666 days before the start of 2001. This brings us to the year 1990, with the Gulf War and Operation Desert Shield. Operation Desert Shield, in reverse reduction, is 119. Operation Desert Storm, which followed, was 347 Francis Bacon. Now, measuring from the start of the invasion of Kuwait to the date of the September 11th attacks is 133 months and 10 days. The number 1,331 is of great significance. This is the result of 11 cubed. Remember, 11 plus 11 plus 11 is 33. Eclipse has reduction gematria of 33. The 33rd prime number is 137. Total eclipse, using the alphabetic order, sums to 137. And if we measure from the date of the start of the Gulf War to the date of the second Great American Eclipse in April of 2024, we find it's a little over 33 years. This 33-year span is more specifically 404 months, the number of verses in Revelation. Also of note is the number of days, which has 1, 2, 3, and 4 in order. But if we measure instead from the beginning of the invasion to the first American eclipse, we find it's 324 months and 20 days. Dropping the 0, this is 3242. This doesn't look like much on its own, but what's important here is the inverse, 2,423. And this is the number that ties everything together. The date of Solomon's Temple's destruction, according to rabbinic work done in the 2nd century, was revised to have occurred in the year 422 BC. This means that the September 11th attacks in 2001 marked the 2,423rd year since. 2423, however, is not just any old number. It happens to be the 360th prime number. 360, the number of degrees in a circle. The word numerology, in fact, sums to 2423 with square numbers. On top of this, when written out, the number 2423 sums to 457 in ordinal, which is the 88th prime number. But what's most remarkable about this is that if you measure from the date of the first Great American Total Solar Eclipse on August 21st, 2017, to the second American Total Eclipse on April 8th, 2024, it's a span of exactly 2,423 days. From the events of 9/11 to the first Great American Solar Eclipse comes out to 191 months and 10 days. Not only is there a 9/11 in that number, but if you look at the book of Revelation, you'll find that 1911 is the 331st verse. 331 is a very special number to this book. The 331st prime number is 2221, and chapter 22, verse 21, is the final verse of Revelation. In Revelation, there's just one verse that appears more than once. It shows up in the following verse numbers. Note especially the 36 and 322. Not only does this verse have reverse reduction gematria of 314 like the digits of pi, but in Jewish gematria, this verse sums to 3,310, just like 331. And there's something else special about 331. When you write out 331, it sums to 1331, one of three numbers to do so. Twin eclipses equals 1331, and from 9/11, the first eclipse came 16 years later, which is also 1331 in Jewish gematria. 133 is, of course, one of the other two numbers to sum to 1331, with the third being 393. This is the gematria of Anita Sideris, which is the Greek name for the Metonic cycle, which is 19 years. That's the exact amount of time between the annular eclipse of 9/11/1988 and the partial eclipse of 9/11/2007. September 11th, 2001 fell 1 week before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. 1 week and 7 days, both sum to 33 in reduction. The new year would be 5762. And first, when we add these two numbers separately, 57 and 62, we get 119. But even more alarming is that when written out, 5762 equals 3,310. Is this all just an amazing coincidence? Well, consider the fact that if you measure from the corner of the 9/11 Memorial at the World Trade Center in New York City to the corner of the 9/11 Memorial at the Pentagon, it's exactly 331 kilometers, according to Google Maps. This is an overhead look at the same measurement. There's a few big cities along this line, the biggest of which is Philadelphia. And this ties in as well. One of the 7 churches written to in the book of Revelation is the Church of Philadelphia. Both church and Philadelphia have gematria of 61. This church is first mentioned in Revelation 1:11. September 11th is the date that leaves 111 days in the year. New York equals 111 ordinal. World Trade Center equals 1,110 Sumerian. And the World Trade Center is in New York, New York, which is 1,110 reverse extended. Arlington, the site of the Pentagon, is 1,011 in Hebrew. The second verse that mentions Philadelphia is 3:7, and this has intriguing gematria. It's 757 reduced, but in ordinal it's 1810. Recall that both Solomon's Temple and World Trade Center are 181 in Jewish ordinal. This also translates to gematria of 10,860 in Sumerian, which ties back to 1109. Lastly, this verse has 161 letters. This matches gematria of Tisha B'Av in English, Frank Baconis, and World Trade Center in Hebrew ordinal. To see further on how this ritual is related to Revelation, we need to look at the number 44. This is, of course, half of 88, but it's another number associated with time. In Hebrew, the word for circle equals 44, and in Jewish gematria, circuit equals 404. Analog clocks are circles, and clock equals 44. The two buildings attacked on 9/11 were in New York, New York, and Washington, both of which have 44 gematria in Hebrew. In 2001, the Tisha B'Av Day of Fast fell on July 29th, a date written in the States as 729. And this is another number related to circles. Full circle equals 729 in trigonal, and measuring from 729 to the date 9/11 is exactly 44 days. 9th of Av in reverse reduction and September 11th in Hebrew reduction, both summing to 44. The 44th prime number is 193. Both Solomon's Temple and Second Temple equal 193 in ordinal and reverse, respectively. The World Trade Center even had its first day of operation on the date written 4/4, April 4th, back in 73. We'll talk about why 1973 may have been used later. Appropriately, Revelation 4:4 has 181 characters. In Hebrew, Solomon's Temple is referred to as the First Temple. This has a gematria value of 1,423. This number looks familiar. It's exactly 1,000 less than 2,423, the 360th prime. 1,423 is the 224th prime number. Subtract 224 from 360, and you get 136. 13, of course, the sixth prime number. Remember, 9/11 was 13 years after an annular eclipse and 6 years to the day before a partial one. Interestingly, in the year 1306, the Jews are said to have been exiled from France the day after Tisha B'Av on the date 722, a number we'll look at in the coming slides. So up here we have the 224th prime number. Flip that number around and you get 422. Again, 422 BC is the year Solomon's Temple was destroyed. Gematria seems to confirm this connection to Revelation. Both Solomon's Temple and Revelation equal 850 in English Extended. With this in mind, it then appears significant that the 44th verse of Revelation is 224. This verse contains 185 characters. 185 is the reverse gematria of Solomon's Temple and the ordinal sum of World Trade Center. Saturn is 185, Frank Baconus, and of course this ritual was a tribute to the mathematics of the circle. Additionally, this verse contains 38 words. The 38th prime number is 163. That's the ordinal value in Hebrew of the First Temple. Furthermore, the 38th triangular number is 741, and that's the extended gematria of Saturn in English. In single reduction, the verse Revelation 2:24 equals 722. From the date Bush Jr. took office in 2001 to the date 9/11 was 7 months and 22 days. The 9/11 Commission report would later be released on the date 7/22. And on 9/11, World Trade Center 7, a building that was not even hit by an airplane, collapsed at free fall speed 7 hours and 22 minutes after World Trade Center 2, the first building to collapse that morning. 722 and its inverse, 227, are two of the most important numbers to have eyes for. To get the pi symbol on a Windows keyboard, you can use Alt-227, and this is because 22 divided by 7 is the smallest equation you can use to get the first three digits of pi, 3.14. And when you write this equation out in English ordinal, 22 divided by 7 equals 314. 360, the number of degrees in a circle, sums to 227. In Hebrew, the United States of America equals 227. And using prime numbers, United States of America equals 722. To take this a step further, the United States in full Hebrew gematria equals 1314, reminding a little bit of 314. And in the English Kabbalah, which progresses every 11th letter of the alphabet, United States of America equals 314. This concept is further represented in the ordinal values of United States, which is 157, and America, which is 50, the number of states. Divide 157 by 50 and you get exactly 3.14. The word circle has reduction and ordinal gematria of 32 and 50. just like America. 227 is a number highly attributed in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the most ubiquitous secret society in the States and probably the world. Ritual and symbolism are the core practices of Masonry. This equals 227 in ordinal, just like ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in reverse reduction. On its own, Scottish Rite of Freemasonry equals 143 in that same cipher, and this is the Hebrew gematria for the word circle. I mentioned earlier how significant 13 is, so I find it funny that Masons equals 1313 in squares, both forwards and reverse. The Masonic emblem with the square and compass has a capital letter G. Capital G has gematria of 13 and 33. Circular in square numbers sums to 1333. And if you divide 33 by 13, you get 2.54. Remember, 9/11 is the 254th day of the year. This equation in gematria, 33 divided by 13, sums to 339, matching the reverse value of United States of America, which is also 186 with all reduction exceptions like square and compass in ordinal. Square and compass also equals 93 reverse reduction, but my favorite is 1611 in trigonal. Recall from earlier, the King James Bible was completed in the year 1611. Now, if the pattern continues, the date September 11th should have gematria that hints at these numbers having to do with circles, and it absolutely does. When the date is written as September the 11th, as it has commonly been referred to ever since that day, we see it sums to 227 in ordinal. This, on its own, is not very significant, considering this isn't how dates are typically written. But consider that in English Extended, September the 11th equals 1433. That's the 227th prime number. Intriguing is that 227 miles translates to 365 kilometers. 365, of course, the number of days in the Gregorian calendar. And September the 11th in the Kabbalah equals 365. In Satanic gematria, this sums to 927, like the word sacrifice in squares. And in Jewish gematria, September the 11th equals 1373. This is the 220th prime number. In Revelation chapter 2, verse 20, has 227 characters. The 220th verse of the book, meanwhile, is 13:9. Freemasonry equals 139 ordinal. Verse 13:9 has the fewest number of letters of any verse in the entire book, and as such, the smallest ordinal gematria. This number is 257. This is a number I've discussed in my work on eclipse sacrifices. Not only is it the 55th prime number, matching the single reduction value of sacrifice, but in reverse, both total solar eclipse and blood sacrifice equal 257. This brings us to a more common way to say the date, 9/11/2001, which in Jewish gematria sums to 2507. In English Extended, 9/11/2001 equals 2207, like 22 divided by 7. This is the 329th prime number, and using prime numbers, 9/11/2001, as written in Roman numerals, sums to 329. 9/11/2001 in reduction is 110 full and 119 single. The towers both had 110 stories. And for our one and only look at reverse satanic in this presentation, 9/11/2001 equals 1189. This is the reverse trigonal value of the word circle, a match I would have found to be random, but wouldn't you know, that's the exact number of chapters that are in the modern-day Holy Bible. The United States could be called the land of 13. I mean, we started with 13 stripes on the flag, 13 stars, 13 colonies. The flag has consisted of stars and stripes. Star equals 13, and stripe equals 33 Pythagorean. Both of these numbers, when written out, have identical gematria of 1515, using squares and English Extended, respectively. The number 13 in ordinal equals 99, and this matches the reduction value of the United States of America. United, America, and circle, all with capital letters taken into account, also have values of 99. In the reverse order, 13 equals 117. The United States of America, with the S exception, is 117. And think about how there's 13 stars and 13 stripes on that original flag. When you add the number 13 to the gematria of stars and stripes, you get 84 and 228, reduction ordinal. United States of America, both 84 and 228 as well. USA in septenary gematria sums to 13. The 13th prime number is 41, and in ordinal, USA equals 41. This brings us to the year 1941. This is the year that construction started on the Pentagon. And wouldn't you know, September 11th is the date that it started. You may recall that on September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld announced that the Pentagon lost track of $2.3 trillion, or 8,000 for every person living in the country. I find it interesting that the Pentagon equals 203 in Hebrew gematria. So construction started in 41, and in Hebrew, the Pentagon equals 41 in reduction. The first temple was constructed in the year 832 BC, meaning it stood for 410 years. In Jewish gematria, circles of time equals 410, as does the word ritual. Bush, the president during 9/11, sums to 410 in English gematria. Both he and his father were members of Skull and Bones, which is 41 reduction. And don't forget that Bush Sr. was the 41st president. In 1941, Tisha B'Av fell on the date August 2nd, which has a Pythagorean value of 41. Measuring from that date to the beginning of Pentagon construction is a span of 41 days. I also want to point out the Hebrew ordinal gematria of the Pentagon, which is 68, like Solomon's Temple in reverse reduction. Now in 1942, the year after construction began, Tisha B'Av fell on the date 22/7, which fell 314 days after 9/11. Remember, 22 divided by 7 equals 3.14. 41 is also the year that the final solution was ordered, which is said to have highly accelerated the Holocaust. Final solution equals 74 and 88 reduced, just like Jewish in the ordinal methods. The Nazi commander who got these orders was Heinrich Himmler, with initials of HH, or 88. The Pentagon was constructed directly across the river from the Washington Monument. If you drop a pin at the dead center of these two structures, you find it's 2,727 meters. This number brings us again to 729, which is 27 times 27. Freemason also equals 729 in trigonal. And noteworthy is that in the octal numbering system, which is base 8 instead of base 10, 729 equates to 1331. And measuring from the date the nation declared its independence on July 4th, 1776, to the date September 11th, 2001, is exactly 2,702 months and 7 days. The Pentagon was completed on the date January 15th, 1943, and it's the perfect date for a military command center. The word killing has double gematria of 115, and in reverse reduction, it's 43. It cost the taxpayers a total of $83 million at the time, and it was constructed on the 38th parallel. The word murder is 83 and 38 in reverse. Its address is 1400 defense, and 1400 equals 227 in the reverse order. This means the project was finished 1 year, 4 months, and 4 days after it began, and it's just perfect. Earlier I spoke about the number 44. When written out, this sums to 144 ordinal, as does the date written 4/4, April 4th. Revelation 4:4 has 144 letters in it, and if you measure from one corner of the Pentagon to the middle of the opposite side, you'll get 440 meters, which appropriately translates to just over 1,440 feet. In gematria, the word kill equals 44, and killer equals 144 in Jewish. If you wish, take a second to glance over all the words having to do with the military and its members that sum to 44 in reduction. 44 bears a light similarity to the number 99, depending on the font perhaps, which is of special interest since 44 equals 99 in the reverse order. And this brings us back to the number 13, which is 99 ordinal. Earlier, we looked at the verse 224 in Revelation, which was the 44th verse. Well, now let's look at the 224th verse, which happens to be chapter 13, verse 13. In ordinal, this has gematria of 910, 91 being the 13th triangular number. In reverse reduction, we get a 404, the number of verses in Revelation, and as we saw near the beginning, the way you write September 11th in Hebrew, with that 11 added, is 404. But more intriguing to me is the reverse gematria here of 1331, a number I discussed earlier. The 9/11 Commission Report, which was released on the date 7/22, came out exactly 13 years, 31 days before the first Great American Total Eclipse here in 2017. El, again the king of the gods in Hebrew, represented by Saturn, sums to 13 and 31. The god Pan, also a Saturnian symbol, is 1331, as is the word cube, relevant in that we have the black cubes of Saturn in many of the world's largest financial districts. Again, the Gulf War began 133 months, 10 days before 9/11. And in 2001, Tisha B'Av fell on 7/29. And again, 1331 is the octal equivalent of 729. 1331 again related to 33, which is the reduction value of the word eclipse. And there's a whole lot more to this 1331 number. In 2001, there was the extremely rare occurrence of a total solar eclipse, the least common type of solar eclipse, falling on the summer solstice. This happened over the continent of Africa. That year, the solstice was on June 21st. First, I want you to note the purported gamma of this total eclipse, 0.5701. 5701 was the year on the Hebrew calendar when construction began on the Pentagon. But what about the time totality ended? It's listed as 1331 UTC time. How about that? But let's take it one step further. As it turns out, the spring equinox in 2001 is said to have occurred on March 20th at exactly 1331 UTC. The Great American Eclipse of 2017 was the first total eclipse to travel coast to coast in the United States since the year 1918. Measuring from this eclipse on June 8th of that year to the August 21st, 2017 eclipse gives us 1,190 months and 13 days. Total eclipse in Jewish ordinal equals 130, and 13 equals 99, as we've been seeing. Well, of course, this date fell 99 years before 2017, and then we also have a span of 74 days on top of that. 99 years in Satanic Gematria equals 722, and as far as the 74 days, total solar eclipse in Jewish Gematria equals 704, and when reduced, it equals 74. This 74 days also equates to 2 months and 13 days. Well, the 44th day of the year is 2/13. That's also the first day of Lupercalia, which equals 44, a festival celebrating death. Death in Satanic Gematria equals 213. So with all this talk of 9/11, I looked through the book of Revelation to see if any verses had a gematria value of 911. And there's only 2 in the English and Jewish ciphers. The first of which is the 33rd verse, which is 213. And this sums to 911, with the Jewish cipher reduced to a single digit for each letter. This verse appropriately has 44 words and 186 letters. 186, a number we've been touching on from time to time. Of course, the 186th prime number, 1109. 911, remember, this is the 156th prime number. This is the 33rd verse of Revelation, and when you write out 33, it equals 156 ordinal. A little closer look at the numbers 186 and 156. False flag has extended gematria of 186, so does conspiracy, 1086. Bush in reverse squares, the president during 9/11, 1086. United States of America, with all reverse reduction exceptions applied, equals 186. And our Independence Day, July 4th, because 1776 was a leap year, that fell on the 186th day of the year. False flag in Jewish gematria equals 156. False flag in reduction is 33 and ordinal in 69. So how strange is it that this false flag lines up perfectly with the eclipses, eclipse 33 reduction and 69 ordinal. Furthermore, solar eclipse equals 433 in Jewish gematria, and false flag in trigonal is 433. There's only one other verse in Revelation with gematria of 911. That's also in Jewish reduced, and it's chapter 12, verse 10. Recall the word revelation equals 121 ordinal, 121, which is 11 squared. So think about it. There's two verses that sum to 911, the first being the 33rd verse, and the second is 1210. 3 times 3 is 9, and the square root of 121 is 11. So it all ties together. Now, speaking of coming together nicely, New York in reverse reduction equals 33, and New York, New York, the city and the state, equals 156 in the reverse order. We saw before how 33 equals 156, but in the reverse order, 33 when spelled out equals 141. These two numbers are both connected. 156 and 141 when spelled out both sum to 226 using the alphabetic order. And when you write out 226, it sums to 93 in reduction. So how wild is it that the 1993 World Trade Center bombing occurred on the date 2/26/93? When we reduce the date numerology of September 11th, 2001, we come up with 9113. And measuring from the date of the World Trade Center bombing in 93 to September 11th, 2001 is exactly 3,119 days, the inverse of 9113. Remember, 91 is the 13th triangular number. The World Trade Center project began on the date March 11th, and the towers were destroyed on September 11th. 3,119, the 444th prime number. Recall the motto of Thelema, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," is 444, both English and Jewish ordinal. So 33 and New York, New York, both summing to 156. Let's take a glance at Revelation chapter 15, verse 6. And in single reduction, we find that this sums to 666. In English ordinal, 666 equals 156. This verse is 156 characters. And in reverse ordinal, this has gematria of 2034. Dropping the 0, this gives us 234. And when adding this number to its inverse, 432, we get the sum of 666. 6 cubed, or 6 times 6 times 6, has a product of 216. In Jewish ordinal, New York, New York, sums to 216. Taking a look at Revelation chapter 21, verse 6, we find that this verse has an ordinal gematria of 1,337. And in English extended, World Trade Center equals 1,337. This verse also has 163 characters. Remember, the first temple in Hebrew sums to 163. But if we measure from the last date of the invasion of Kuwait, August 4th, 1990, measuring up to 9/11, 2001, it's 133 months and 7 days. Now, this invasion lasted 3 days, and if you start at the first date of the invasion, we get 133 months and 9 days. Jesus Christ in trigonal gematria sums to 1,339. I don't at all think it's a stretch to see the destruction of the Twin Towers as a ritual partially devoted to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The plate above Jesus on the cross read, "The King of the Jews," which sums to 185 ordinal, matching the gematria of both Solomon's Temple and World Trade Center. The Twin Towers were located in Manhattan, which is 151 reverse, like Jesus Christ in ordinal. Jesus equals 74. He was born Jewish and died on the cross. Both of those are 74. The World Trade Center complex is tucked just within the boundaries of the 74th meridian. The 74th prime number is 373, and New York, using prime numbers, sums to 373. Likely of no coincidence is that the 373rd verse of Revelation, which is 21:17, is the only other verse in Revelation in any of the basic ciphers I use that also has a gematria value of 3,310. And naturally, it's using prime numbers. In reduction, Jesus equals 11, and comparing that number to the tower's shape requires no words. Leading up to the events of 9/11, there was a robbery at the World Trade Center back in 1998 that took place on the 11th floor at the Bank of America. This took place with a date numerology of 113, 11 and 3 the factors of 33, but we'll look at why 113 hints at this being a hoax in a little bit. This robbery secured $1.6 million in cash. Of course, 4 times 4 equals 16, and 16 in gematria is one of only 2 numbers that, when spelled out, equals 33. But what's so significant about this date, January 14th, 1998, is that it was exactly a span of 1,337 days before 9/11. This is the gematria, again, of World Trade Center. Of course, it was a Brinks truck that was robbed. Brinks truck equals 146 and 151. Jesus Christ, in ordinal, 151, and in reverse, 146. The date of this robbery also had numerology of 123, like the word conspiracy, English ordinal. And just look at the names of the people involved in this robbery. Ralph Guarino, 68 reduction. Salvatore Calciano, 171, English ordinal. And Melvin Folk, 119. It's like all the numbers are here. And finally, you had this guy, Richie Gillette. His name had 137 gematria, as well as 610. 610 matches the gematria of crucifix in Jewish. And also note how robbers Melvin Folk and Mike Reed, in the reverse order, 151 and 146 also. But the hints at the attacks of 9/11 began long before the 1990s. Let's go all the way back to 1967, the year before World Trade Center construction even began. David Rockefeller appeared on the cover of an issue of Newsweek. Newsweek equals 33 in gematria, and its first issue was released in 1933. The title of this issue read David Rockefeller, New Era in Banking. Both of these, in Jewish and English respectively, sum to 147. New Era in Banking in trigonal equals 1086. We've been looking at 186 a lot during this presentation. New Era in Banking also matches New World Order in reduction. But what's really interesting is that this date numerology, when adding all the numbers together, 4, 3, 19, and 67, sums to 93, and this issue was released on April 3rd, that's the 93rd day of the year. The word propaganda equals 93, along with Saturn, as we saw before. Saturn in Jewish gematria is 511, and if you measure from April 3rd to September 11th on the calendar, that's 5 months, 1 week, and 1 day. If you look very closely at this picture, when you zoom into his watch, you'll actually find that the hands on his watch are pointing at 9 and 11. Lastly, New Era in Banking in Jewish gematria equals 1189, just like circle the number of chapters in the Bible. Our current president, by the way, Donald J. Trump, coded in many ways, but also he has that value of 1189. 13 months later, this advertisement was placed in a local newspaper in New York. And see how the advertisement reads, "The mountain comes to Manhattan"? With capital letters taken into account, this sums to 1109. Again, the 186th prime number, like the gematria of false flag and conspiracy. This ad was issued by a group called the Committee for a Reasonable World Trade Center. In single reduction, this equals 186. And measuring from the date of this ad to 9/11/2001 was 33 years, 18 weeks, and 6 days. Again, false flag equals 33 and 186. This ad was on page 38 of the newspaper. The mountain comes to Manhattan in the English Kabbalah equals 380. And in English ordinal, it equals 322. But perhaps best of all of this is that Committee for a Reasonable World Trade Center in Jewish gematria sums to 2240. Remember, Solomon's Temple destroyed in the year 422 BC. The Port Authority formally backed the World Trade Center project on March 11, 1961. This was a date that had similar 12 and 21 numerology to 9/11/2001. The date 11th of March in gematria, English extended sums to 911, and with that cipher reversed, we get a 331. This approval came exactly 40 years and 6 months before 9/11. In Hebrew reduction, the first temple equals 46. WTC, ordinal, sums to 46. George Bush is 46, reverse reduction. He was born in the year 46. This is another big number in murder by numbers I talk about a lot. Sacrifice sums to 46. In Hebrew, the word for kill equals 46. And that brings us to Dick Cheney, who, by the way, was born exactly a span of 1,984 days before President Bush. He was born on a date with a life lesson number of 46. The project was moved to Lower Manhattan, formally on January 22nd, 1962. This date had similar 41 and 104 numerology to 9/11, which was 14 and 41. The number 14, when written out, equals 41 and 104. The word for kill in Jewish reduced and ordinal equals 14 and 41. The World Trade Center's groundbreaking began on August 5th, 1966. And this is exactly 1,973 days after the building was originally approved. And remember, it opened in the year 1973. This date, April 4th, comes 3 weeks and 3 days after March 11th. The 33rd prime number is 137, as I touched on. And when you write this number out, 137, it sums to 1973 in Jewish gematria. In reduction, this equals 110. This is the number of floors on the World Trade Center. The Trade Center was proposed by David Rockefeller. His last name sums to 110 ordinal. And it was approved by New York Port Authority, which is 110 reduction. The buildings would later be brought down, supposedly, by Osama bin Laden, 110 ordinal, on the date 9/11/2001, 110 reduced. And think about 911 in relation to the emergency's dialing code. 911 equals 110 also. Both of the buildings were 110 stories tall. The North Tower had a 110-meter antenna. And the other building that was struck that day, the Pentagon, was in Arlington, which in ordinal is 110. The man who owned the World Trade Center complex at the time of its destruction was really nice-looking guy Larry Silverstein. He bought the complex on July 24th, 2001. This was a span of exactly 1 month, 19 days before the attacks. The name Larry in extended gematria equals 911, and Larry Silverstein equals 226, ordinal. In February of 1975, there was a fire that occurred in the World Trade Center on the date 2/13. This, of course, the 44th day of the year. The fire started on the 11th floor, and it spread to the 9th and 14th floors, meaning it covered a total of 6 floors. This fire occurred 1 year, 10 months, and 9 days since the date 4/4 in 73, when the buildings first opened. This also equates to 680 days. Remember, 68, the year that World Trade Center construction began. The fire commissioner who was quoted in this original newspaper article from 1975, his name was John T. O'Hagan. His name has ordinal gematria of 113. And in Baba Kama 113 of the Talmud, it states that Jews may use lies to circumvent the Gentile. And look at all these words in English that sum to 113 that have to do with lies, dishonesty, and deception. This fire was foreshadowed by a film called The Towering Inferno. This was released 1 month and 30 days before the fire. Towering Inferno in reverse gematria equals 213, and the date of the World Trade Center fire was 2/13. The film was released on December 14th, 1974. That's a date with 119 numerology. World Trade Center fire in reverse reduction sums to 119. Now, September 11th, 2001 can be written 11/9/1 internationally. Towering Inferno in English extended equals 1191. The film was written by Sterling Silliphant. He has 93 reduction gematria, just like Towering Inferno. The movie was produced by John Guillermin, which is 77 reduction, and produced by Irwin Allen, 117 ordinal. The actors of this film had a lot of the similar numbers that we've been seeing too. 227, 137, 511, 171. You see most of them here. This brings us back around to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. This operation was conducted by a man named Ramzi Youssef, who in single reduction sums to 68. The bomb that he constructed was said to have weighed 680 kilograms. And look at this from the article. It says the bomb caused smoke to rise to the 93rd floor of both towers. Really? How do they know that? I mean, how do they measure these things? There was also a granite memorial fountain honoring the victims of this attack, placed outside the World Trade Center in 1995. This was designed by a woman named Elin Zimmerman. Her name in Jewish gematria sums to 1,190. During the investigation into the bombing, it was revealed that the FBI had an informant who actually told them that there was a plan to build bombs that were going to be exploded in the World Trade Center. His name was Imad Salem. That sums to 226, English extended. This bombing was on the date 226. His name in square numbers equals 911, and in Jewish gematria, it sums to 186. In English extended, Ramzi Youssef sums to 2111. This is another important number to the Bible. The 318th prime number is 2111, and when you divide 7 by 22, you get 0.318. The second coming of Christ is mentioned 318 times in the New Testament. So let's look at Revelation 21:11. And in reverse ordinal, this sums to 1407. Ramzi Youssef in the Jewish order equals 147. This verse has 119 characters that contain 93 letters, this bombing in the year 93. In English ordinal, this verse sums to 1104. And recall, we had a Bank of America robbery, which is 1104 Sumerian, occur on the date 1/14. Finally, we get to the events that occurred on the date September 11th, 2001, where hijackers use knives and box cutters to take over these airplanes and crash them into buildings. Knives and box cutters equals 911, satanic gematria, by the way. So let's look at the total gematria of the hijackers involved in these attacks. The 5 hijackers who took over Flight 11 and supposedly crashed into the World Trade Center, their names sum to 314 in single reduction. Remember, pi equals 3.14. Flight 175, the other plane to hit the World Trade Center, let's add up the name of those hijackers, and we find in reverse reduction it sums to 360, the number of degrees in a circle. And for Flight 77, add these 5 men's names up to get 331, reverse reduction. Remember, the Pentagon Memorial is exactly 331 kilometers away from the one at the World Trade Center. So here I created this basic table with some data of the flights that crashed on that day. Look at the load factors, first of all. If you add those numbers up, it sums to 144. Again, 44 equals 144, time 144 in Jewish. These flights, if you add up the number of minutes that these took, it was 254 total minutes of flight time. Again, September 11th, the 254th day of the year, the word time summing to 254 English extended. A total of 265 people were killed on these flights. September 11th in reverse gematria sums to 265. If you take the number of passengers and crew for the 2 planes that struck the towers and reduce them to either a single digit or a master number, you get 9, 11, and 11, 9. Notice the total number of civilians who died, 213. 213 was the first verse of Revelation to sum to 911. It's the 33rd verse of the book. And look at all the times the number 33 appears here. 2 of the planes had a load factor of 33%. There were 33 civilians on Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville, and a total of 33 crew members were aboard these planes. As for the 64 and 44 number of people that were on Flight 77 and 93, Israel has gematria of 64 and 44, also the word kill in ordinal, 64 and 44. The North Tower, which was the first building to be hit but the second one to collapse, did so 1 hour and 42 minutes after the impact of Flight 11. This means that the attack lasted 102 minutes. Al-Qaeda, who was blamed for this attack, sums to 102 in Jewish gematria. New York, with all exceptions, equals 102. Also in Jewish gematria, Al-Qaeda terrorist attack equals 911 and 227 ordinal. In English Extended, this sums to 1391, pointing to the fact that this was just another ritual. Of course, 91, the 13th triangular number, but the word ritual, in squares and reverse squares, sums to 1391. In regards to the attack lasting an hour and 42 minutes, terrorist equals 142. Osama bin Laden was blamed for taking the towers down. His name sums to 1420 squares. And the man who had the towers built in the first place, his name 1402 squares. American Airlines Flight 11, when the number 11 is added to the equation, sums to 224. Check the description for a link to my video on the famous people who were told were killed on 9/11 to see how this was all done by the numbers. Frasier producer David Angel, for instance, was killed on Flight 11, and exactly 224 weeks before September 11th, American Airlines Flight 11 was mentioned in an episode of Frasier that he co-wrote. There were also some celebrities who narrowly escaped death by either missing or canceling their flights that day. First is Mark Wahlberg, whose name conveniently sums to 119. He was born on the 156th day of the year. Remember, 911 is the 156th prime number. Seth MacFarlane was too hungover to get up in time for his flight. MacFarlane equals 227, and his full name, SWM, equals 1019 satanic, as well as 2197 trigonal. 2197 is 13 cubed. And actress Leanne Luttrell also rescheduled her flight to dodge the attack, and her name, in that same cipher, is 1313. While doing research for this video, I came across something I haven't really seen anyone pick up on. There are discrepancies in various official documents regarding what type of aircraft crashed into the North Tower on 9/11. American Airlines Flight 11 was a 767-200 model, which is also what appears on the NTSB briefing of the accident. However, multiple sources indicate a 767-223 was the one involved in the actual crash. Naturally, the 9/11 Commission report omits any mention of either a -200 or -223 airliner. This supports the theory that the planes were switched and the objects that struck the Twin Towers were actually military aircraft. Checking out the name gematria on some of these hijackers, this operation on Flight 11 was led by Mohammed Atta. In Jewish gematria, his name sums to 330, and in prime numbers, it's 314. Walid al-Shari was also on this flight. His name sums to 130 in both English and Jewish ordinal. We also had Satam al-Sukami, 903 English extended. Remember, this flight crashed into the 93rd through 99th floors of the tower. And there was also Abdulaziz al-Omari, 171, and this number is significant for its prime relationship of 1019. Mohammed Atta, however, in English ordinal equals 101, and Revelation 10:1 sums to 1477 in English ordinal, as does World Trade Center in Jewish gematria. 9/11 was 175 days after the spring equinox, and here we had Flight 175 crashing into the South Tower. This happened at exactly 9:03 a.m. When you add up the two flight numbers that crashed into these towers, 11 and 175, you get 186. Divide that number by 2, and you find that the average of the flight numbers was 93. The average load factor for this flight was 49%. This flight crashed 49 minutes after takeoff. This is the reduction gematria of Revelation. This flight crashed at the 77th floor. 77 also equals 49, but I find it intriguing that it was flight number 175 to do so. 9/11 was the culmination of decades of planning to fool the public and rule over its consciousness. Consciousness equals 175 ordinal and 77 reverse reduced. I think this may be intentional, as there's no question 9/11 symbolism includes the destruction of the tree of life, our path to enlightenment. This path is represented in the Kabbalah by the 10 Sephiroth, or energy centers. Possessing only 9 of these spheres represents falling short of real wisdom, and pursuit of an 11th sphere can represent lack of understanding of our true will. And just think about it, the 2 pillars, one with its antenna being the male and the other being the female, both destroyed and replaced with just one tower, symbolizing the left-brained, male-dominated theology of the United States and Israeli war machines. All of the aircraft that struck their targets on 9/11 were traveling way faster than max speed. and Flight 11 was no exception. It was traveling 404 knots. Think about Revelation having 404 verses. And check out this quote from the Wikipedia article, where it says, "Everyone from the 92nd floor and up were trapped, and somehow they know that this was exactly 1,344 people." Well, of course they don't know that, but really it sums up to the gematria. 1,344 equals 410 ordinal. That's the number of years Solomon's temple stood. And in English Extended, it's 3119. Again, the number of days between the World Trade Center bombing and the 9/11 attacks. Jules Naudet was the only one to film Flight 11 crashing into the World Trade Center. His name in reduction sums to 33. He's from France, which is 47 in English ordinal. Flight 11 crashed 47 minutes after takeoff at 8:46 a.m. And when you write out the time, 8:46, it sums to 185 ordinal, just like World Trade Center. Also, 8:46 summing to 77 reduction, just like World Trade Center and September 11th. Two of the main hijackers on this flight, Hani Hanjour and Khalid al-Mindar, both of their names sum to 119 ordinal. Hani Hanjour summing to 1,037 Jewish, remember 137, the 33rd prime number, and Khalid al-Mindar, with prime numbers, equals 330. Both of these men also in Francis Bacon have this 171 gematria. So let's look at the numbers they gave us for this flight. It took off from the airport at 8:20 in the morning and was hijacked between 8:51 and 8:54. Well, this is roughly 33 minutes into the flight. Before striking the Pentagon, they said this flight took a 330-degree turn at 2,200 feet. 2,200 equals 77 in reduction. But also see that this crashed at 9:37 a.m. Well, from the time it took off at 8:20, this comes out to 77 minutes. The impossible speed they told us Flight 77 was moving at was 530 miles per hour. And they give us a number of translations here to different measurement systems, but what they're missing is feet per second. And maybe that's because 530 miles per hour is 777 feet per second. Multiplying 7 times 7 times 7 gives you 343. The plane struck at 9:37:46, and when you write that out in gematria, it sums to 343. The Pentagon sits on the 77th meridian west and is also 77 feet tall. 7 plus 7 is 14. The Pentagon sits at 1400 Defense as its address. So all of this means that, according to the official story, there were 4 flights that crashed, a total span of 77 minutes apart. And Flight 77 hit the 77-foot-tall Pentagon on the 77th meridian 77 minutes after takeoff at 777 feet per second on the 577th minute of the day. Flight 93 is not that terribly interesting. It might just be more of a filler to complete the numerology for this entire ritual. But I will note that it crashed in the city of Shanksville. And I've been talking about reverse reduction with all exceptions. This is a cipher they like because they consider that it's hidden. And Shanksville, using this method, sums to 93. Shanksville, PA, with capital letters, Francis Bacon equals 227. And in Jewish gematria, it sums to 1054. Remember, the 154th verse of Revelation is chapter 9, verse 11. Across the freeway from where Flight 77 struck the Pentagon is Arlington National Cemetery. And on the date of 9/11, this cemetery was 137 years old. Arlington and Arlington, Virginia, in Hebrew gematria, sums to 169 and 91 ordinal. Both of these numbers connected to 13. 169 is 13 squared, and 91 is the 13th triangular. In English, Arlington, VA, in ordinal is 133, and Arlington in reverse is 133. This is, of course, the other number that sums to 1331 in Jewish when spelled out. Arlington National Cemetery in reduction sums to 119, and in Hebrew ordinal, it sums to 244. In Hebrew gematria, the word for kill equals 244. Let's take a quick look at the numerology of George W. Bush. His name also in both English and Jewish ordinal sums to 130. This is the value in the Jewish cipher of government and Freemasonry. One of George Bush's nicknames was his initials, GWB. This sums to 13 reverse reduction and 103 with prime numbers. And of course, with initials, you got to look at the capital letter ciphers. GWB equals 110 and 127. We had two buildings that were 110 stories tall, and it was buildings 1, 2, and 7 that fell that day. George in Jewish gematria is 154. His middle name Walker, 1016, like an upside down 911. And he's from New Haven, which is 1019 English extended. New Haven CT, 119 Jewish ordinal. And look at the numbers they gave us for Bush's sorry excuse for military service. They say he was part of the 147th Reconnaissance Wing. George Walker Bush in Jewish gematria sums to 1470, and with all reverse reduction exceptions, 147. He was also in the 187th Fighter Wing. His nickname W in square numbers equals 1087. His birth date, July 6th, was the 187th day of the year. This is a very significant number to the occult. The Torah has 187 chapters. The White House sits in Washington, D.C., reverse value of 187. In reduction, ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry equals 187. Society of Jesus, part of the Catholic Church, equals 187 reverse. The word time in Satanic gematria, 187. A couple more interesting things about George Bush's name gematria. George equals 174, just like George Walker Bush in the Jewish order. And in English, George Walker Bush equals 177. Well, he's the perfect puppet president for the New World Order. In English ordinal, it's 174. Reverse, it's 177. I thought maybe coincidence, but his dad, George Herbert Walker Bush, sums to 1750 in Jewish gematria, just like New World Order is 175 in Jewish ordinal. George Walker Bush sums to 1444 in trigonal, just like the number 33, and he was born on a date with a life lesson number of 33. So I spent a lot of time discussing solar eclipses and why I think 9/11 was a ritual sacrifice to the gods, particularly the keeper of time, Saturn. There might be more to support that. Here's a look at the controversial Georgia Guidestones, on which plans in line with the New World Order agenda are stated. These were erected on the date March 22nd, 1980, of course a lot like 322. In gematria, Georgia Guidestones sums to 1019 in extended. Using the Jewish order, the Georgia Guidestones sums to 224. And in the reverse order, this equals 334, which is a number one reversed, matches solar eclipse in Jewish. Using the alphabetic order, the Georgia Guidestones equals 233. And the eclipse that just occurred here in 2017 fell on the 233rd day of the year. The Georgia Guidestones sit just a couple of miles inside the path of totality of this 2017 total solar eclipse. Now, these Guidestones are not in the path of the second total eclipse in 2024. Maybe that would be a little too obvious, but what's important to know about total eclipses is that there are 2 points in the path of totality that bear significance. There's the point of greatest eclipse, where the center of the moon's shadow passes most closely through to the center of the Earth. There's also another spot called the point of longest duration, where eclipse totality lasts longer than at any other point, usually by just about a fraction of a second. So I measured from the Georgia Guidestones to these 2 points to see if anything stood out, and I'm hard-pressed to believe that this is coincidental. If you add up the number of kilometers in these 2 measurements, you get a sum of 4,460. This means the points are an average of 2,230 kilometers away. The moon, in Hebrew gematria, is 223, and this is the number of months in a Saros cycle, which allows us to predict the next eclipse. And don't forget, these were built on the 22nd day of the 3rd month. I find this a little unsettling in light of the rest of my research, and I believe it points to a massive depopulation agenda in the time leading up to the second eclipse. And that agenda appears to already be in full swing. I'm going to include a link to my video on the numerology of Hurricane Harvey, which was a man-made disaster, planned out by the numbers just as all other false flag rituals the elite get off on. Entire nations have been devastated since the first eclipse. Mass shooting stories have increased. I think we're only seeing the beginning of this play out. September 11th measured up nicely to more than just total eclipses that occurred on the date September 11th. If you measure to the date of the next total eclipse, you find it's 1 year, 2 months, and 23 days. Going back 2 total eclipses, measuring to the one prior to the one from the 2001 summer solstice, that one occurred on the 223rd day of the year, but that date span is 108 weeks and 6 days, a number I'm getting tired of repeating by this point of the video. In Hebrew, solar eclipse equals 83, and this is also the Jewish ordinal value of Tisha B'Av. From the date of the 2001 summer solstice total eclipse to 9/11 is a span of 83 days. And if you jump ahead 2 total eclipses, you get 803 days. I'd also like to speculate on something that seems unrelated, but may very well be a clue as to how the World Trade Center was brought down. We know it was a lot more than fires that did so. The towers, of course, were in Manhattan, and with so many people claiming miniature nukes might be what dissolved the towers into dust, isn't it interesting that the project that first built up our nuclear arsenal was named the Manhattan Project? Gematria would certainly hold some clues if these events are related, and I believe the clues are there. First of all, the Manhattan Project, in reduction, sums to 77, just like World Trade Center and September 11th. The Manhattan Project has reverse gematria of 103 and 301. And how important were those numbers, 1331, in relation to the 9/11 ritual? New York, New York, in the Jewish order, is 216, so is the Manhattan Project. In the English order, the Manhattan Project equals 212, and in Jewish, it's 1332. Ritual sacrifice in the Kabbalah is 212, blood sacrifice in Jewish is 332, and the borough of Manhattan is home to phone area codes 212 and 332. Also, this program was disbanded on the date August 15th. That's the 227th day of the year. This date had a life lesson numerology of 44. And ever since 9/11, we, the people of this country who have had our freedoms and liberties molested, have endured countless instances of mockery intended to subtly remind us of the events from that day. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of examples, but let's look at just a few. First, in 2003, a huge power outage that affected chunks of the Northeast and Canada stroked fears of another attack in New York City. This is referred to as the Northeast Blackout, which has gematria of 410, again the number of years Solomon's Temple stood. In reverse, Northeast Blackout sums to 254. This occurred 23 months and 3 days after the events of 9/11. 233, remember this is the 13th Fibonacci number. This blackout occurred on the 226th day of the year. Recall that the Trade Center was bombed on the date 226. This date also leaves 139 days left in the year. Freemasonry equals 139. In 2011, the Pentagon was struck by a minor earthquake on the date August 23rd. This happened to fall a span of 9 years and 11 months, or also 119 months after September 11th, 2001. The Pentagon, by the way, it's got 5 sides, it's 5 stories tall, and there's a 5-acre inner court. Multiply 5 times 5 times 5, and you get 125. This is the ordinal value of the Pentagon. Also, earthquake in reverse reduction sums to 55. Just last week, we had a false flag terror attack in Manhattan. Earlier that day, Wendy Williams fainted on her show while dressed as the Statue of Liberty, and a terrorist attack could not have happened much closer to the Statue of Liberty. Her full name in Jewish gematria sums to 3,119, and if we measure from the date of this new terrorist attack back to the bombings in 93, we get 9,013 days, and if you measure to 9/11, you find it's 193 months. This attacker's name sums to 119, full reduction. In ordinal and reverse ordinal, his name was 308 and 448. This is the Jewish ordinal value and English ordinal value, respectively, of Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. On September 11th of this year, 2017, the Cleveland Indians won their 19th straight game. And look at the stat box. Not only did they score 11 runs, but they also out-hit the Tigers 11-9. The winning pitcher pushed his record to 15-6. Remember 911, the 156th prime number? Both of these teams have 33 gematria, Tigers and Cleveland, and of course 33 sums to 156. Finally, I'll also link to a video I made on this ritual. In World Wrestling Entertainment, a wrestler named The Big Show, whose name sums to 1313 in squares, was involved in 3 separate ring collapses. The first occurred in 2003, and the last occurred here in April of 2017. These 3 collapses occurred 722 weeks apart from one another. And remember, the third building, World Trade Center 7, to collapse on that day, did so 7 hours and 22 minutes after the first building fell. So that brings us to the 108th and final slide of this video at last. Big thanks to everyone who made it this far and watched the entire thing. It's not easy to convey this information, but I hope I did so in a way that you can pick up on some of this knowledge and use it to potentially wake those up around you. If I made any errors in this video, please let me know in the comments section. The same gang that played this sick ritual out is essentially the same one that's still running the show. And if you think Trump is here to drain the swamp, it's time to pull your head out of your ass. Nothing's going to change until we, the people of this nation, take it back for ourselves. How do we do it? I believe we're at a point in time in which we need to wake up as many people as we can. The internet has become progressively more restrictive on freedom of speech, and it might only be a matter of time until we lose this platform to share truth. There's no greater safety than that which can be procured in numbers. If you find yourself too fearful to speak out, I understand everyone's situation is different, but as more and more people do so, the powers that be will have fewer and fewer resources to track each of us, and eventually the scales will be tipped. So that does it. Thanks again for watching, Truth Seeker, and God bless.